Math does not have a political affiliation. It doesn't care about press conferences, campaign slogans, or perfectly tailored suits. Math just is. And right now, the math in Sacramento is screaming a warning that every single taxpayer needs to hear. We are witnessing a shell game of historic proportions where a massive financial crater is being disguised as a simple pothole. Governor Gavin Newsom looked the cameras in the eye and said the state deficit was under $3 billion. He called it manageable. He called it a blip. But the independent auditors, the people whose only job is to count the actual beans, just released a report that exposes that claim as a $22 billion fabrication. That isn't a difference of opinion. That is a deception 7 times larger than the number they admitted to. This is Matter News, and today we aren't just looking at a spreadsheet. We are looking at the evidence of a cover-up. $2.9 billion versus $22 billion. That is not a rounding error. That is not a miscalculation. That is a lie, and I can prove it to you right now with the numbers they tried to hide. There is a hospital administrator in Los Angeles who just sent termination letters to 200,000 immigrants enrolled in Medicaid. Not next year, not when the budget gets finalized this week, right now, because the money is gone. If Governor Newsom's deficit was really only $2.9 billion, like he told the cameras, why is the state of California conducting the largest healthcare purge in its history? I will tell you exactly why. Because the real number, the number that the Legislative Analyst's office just published 3 days ago, is $22 billion. That is 7.5 times larger than what the governor admitted. Before I show you the documents that prove this cover-up, I need you to do something right now. Tell me in the comments what state you are watching from and whether you have seen your state government play the same accounting games with your budget. Because what is happening in California right now is a warning for every single state in America. This is the only channel that is going line by line through the Legislative Analyst Office report that Sacramento does not want you to read. If you want the truth about where your tax dollars are actually going, hit subscribe right now. Because by the time I am done explaining these numbers, you are going to understand exactly how your government lies to you about money. Let me paint you the picture of what happened. 3 weeks ago, Governor Gavin Newsom stood in front of the California State Capitol with a poster board. On that poster board was a graph. The graph showed a small deficit, a little bump in the road, $2.9 billion. He smiled. He said the words manageable and on track and fiscally responsible. He promised that California's social programs were safe. He promised that the sanctuary state policies would continue. He promised that health care for undocumented immigrants was a moral imperative that California would never abandon. The reporters wrote it down. The headlines went out. California deficit smaller than expected. Newsom projects fiscal stability. Then the Legislative Analyst Office, the LAO, the independent auditors who work for the California legislature, not the governor, released their report. And the number they published was not $2.9 billion. It was $22 billion. Let me say that again so you understand the scale of the deception. The independent auditors found a hole in California's budget that is 7.5 times larger than what the governor told you. This is not a difference of opinion about economic projections. This is not a debate about whether revenues will come in higher or lower next quarter. This is a $20 billion gap between what the man running for president in 2028 wants you to believe and what the accountants can actually prove. How do we know the auditors are telling the truth and the governor is lying? Because of what happened next. Within 72 hours of that LAO report going public, the California Department of Healthcare Services quietly published new eligibility requirements for Medicaid. And those new requirements systematically excluded 200,000 immigrants who were previously covered, not because they committed fraud, not because they were ineligible under the law, but because California is broke and they needed to cut costs immediately. The sanctuary state, the state that promised health care as a human right, regardless of immigration status, just threw 200,000 human beings off their health insurance to save money. If the deficit was really only $2.9 billion, if the budget was really manageable, why would they do that? Why would they create a political nightmare and a humanitarian crisis unless they absolutely had to? I want you to think about what that means in human terms. 200,000 people. That is not a statistic. That is a woman in Fresno who has diabetes and was getting insulin through Medi-Cal and now has to choose between buying her medication or paying rent. That is a child in San Diego who has asthma and whose parents just lost access to the inhaler prescription that keeps him out of the emergency room. That is a family in Oakland where the father has been working construction for 8 years, paying sales tax on every purchase, contributing to the California economy, and his wife just got a letter saying her prenatal care is terminated. These are real people. And Gavin Newsom just decided they are expendable because he lied about the budget and got caught. If you want to understand why a governor would lie about a number this big, you have to look at the timeline. Page 53 of the Independent report contains a sentence that should end political careers. Quote, the proposed budget relies on approximately $11 billion in shifts, deferrals, and one-time solutions that do not address the underlying structural imbalance. End quote. Translation. Gavin Newsom is not fixing the problem. He is hiding it. He is pushing the debt into a dark corner so that next year's governor inherits a catastrophe instead of a balance sheet. Do you see what is happening here? Newsom knows the budget is broken. He knows that California's revenue model is unsustainable. He knows the state cannot keep spending money it does not have, but he does not care about fixing it because he isn't planning to be governor when the bill comes due. He is planning to be running for president. He is going to campaign in 2027 and 2028 as the fiscally responsible executive who balanced the books of the largest economy in America. And by the time voters figure out he was lying, by the time the checks start bouncing and the programs start shutting down, he will be in the White House. Or at least that is the plan. This is the most cynical political maneuver I have seen in years. Newsom is literally sacrificing California's fiscal future for his own presidential ambitions. He is cooking the books. He is kicking vulnerable people off health care. And he is gambling the entire state budget on a stock market bubble, all so he can have good headlines for his campaign. And the media is letting him get away with it because they are too lazy to read the legislative analyst's report. They just print whatever the governor's press office tells them. Let me give you some context about how insane California's budget situation has become. In the 2021 fiscal year, California had a $75 billion surplus. $75 billion. Newsom called it a record surplus, and he spent it. He spent it on expanded social programs, on universal health care pilot programs, on guaranteed income experiments, on subsidies for electric vehicles, on high-speed rail, on everything. He spent every single dollar of that surplus and then some. And he did it based on the assumption that tax revenues would stay at record highs forever. Anyone who has ever looked at a chart of California's tax revenue knows that it is the most volatile in the nation. It spikes during booms and it craters during recessions. But Newsom spent like the boom would never end. Now the boom is ending. Tech companies are laying off workers. Venture capital funding is down 60% from its peak. Commercial real estate in San Francisco is in free fall. Wealthy residents are leaving the state because of high taxes. And suddenly, that $75 billion surplus is gone, and we have a $22 billion deficit. That is a $97 billion swing in 3 years. How does that happen? It happens when you build a budget on sand. It happens when you refuse to plan for downturns. It happens when you prioritize political messaging over economic reality. And the people who are paying the price are always the same people. It is never the governor. It is never the lobbyists. It is never the consultants who get paid six-figure salaries to write reports that nobody reads. It is the immigrants who lose health care. It is the teachers who lose their jobs.